Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're stepping into the ancient courtroom, a place where laws were carved in stone, gods were the ultimate judges, and punishments could be, shall we say, creatively brutal. We're exploring how civilizations like Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and India grappled with the concept of justice thousands of years ago. It's a journey into the very foundations of law and order, and some of it might shock you. So, before we delve into these ancient legal codes, take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button. But only if you genuinely enjoy these historical deep dives. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global community gathering. Now, dim those lights. Maybe get that fan humming softly in the background. And let's ease into tonight's examination of ancient justice. In ancient Babylon, justice wasn't just handed down by kings. It was etched in stone for all to see. Around 1754 BCE, King Hammurabi commissioned a towering stele inscribed with what would become one of the earliest and most influential legal codes in human history. The Code of Hammurabi, standing over 7 feet tall and written in cuneiform script, the black basalt monument was meant to project both order and authority. It didn't just govern, it warned. The Code of Hammurabi contained 282 laws covering everything from trade and family matters to theft and assault. But it wasn't democratic. These laws reflected a rigidly hierarchical society where penalties varied dramatically depending on your social status. For example, if a nobleman broke the bone of another nobleman, the punishment was to have his own bone broken, a clear case of the infamous eye for an eye approach. But if the same nobleman broke the bone of a commoner or a slave, the punishment was merely a fine. Justice in this system was proportional not only to the crime, but to the rank of the person involved. The laws emphasized personal responsibility and state authority. Builders whose poorly constructed homes collapsed and killed the inhabitants could be put to death. Merchants who cheated customers could face mutilation. Even family disputes were tightly regulated with strict laws governing marriage, inheritance, and parental authority. Adultery, theft, and false accusation were especially harshly punished, often by execution or public shaming. What made the code revolutionary was not just its content, but its visibility. It stood in public spaces, carved with the image of Hammurabi receiving divine authority from Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. This wasn't just a legal document, it was propaganda, reinforcing the idea that Hammurabi ruled by divine right, and that his laws were sacred and immutable. However brutal it may seem by modern standards, the Code of Hammurabi established the concept that law should be written, standardized, and accessible. It replaced arbitrary judgment with codified norms. In doing so, it laid the groundwork for later legal systems across the ancient world and continues to fascinate historians, lawyers, and ethicists alike. In Babylon, justice wasn't blind, it was watching, and it had a chisel. In ancient Egypt, justice wasn't just a legal concept, it was a cosmic force. The Egyptians believed in Ma'at, a divine principle embodying truth, balance, and moral order. More than just a goddess, Ma'at represented the foundation of the universe itself. Pharaohs ruled not just with power, but with the responsibility to uphold Ma'at. In doing so, they maintained harmony between gods, nature, and society. Unlike the codified laws of Babylon, Egyptian justice was more flexible and case-specific. There was no singular legal code chiseled into stone. Instead, judges, often high officials or priests, interpreted Ma'at in their rulings. While this allowed for context-sensitive decisions, it also meant that justice could be highly subjective and dependent on the social standing of those involved. Court proceedings were both formal and performative. Cases could be tried before local officials or higher courts in the royal bureaucracy, depending on the severity. Plaintiffs and defendants presented their versions of events, and witnesses were essential. Written records, contracts, testimonies, and petitions were maintained on papyrus, a relatively advanced system of documentation for its time. For common offenses like theft or assault, punishments could include fines, beatings, or forced labor. More serious crimes, such as tomb robbery or blasphemy, were treated as offenses not only against the state, but against the gods. These could lead to execution, sometimes by fire, drowning or impalement, or even posthumous punishment, like desecration of the corpse to prevent entry into the afterlife. Perhaps the most iconic image of Egyptian justice comes from the Book of the Dead, in which the heart of the deceased is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by Ammit, a crocodile, lion, hippopotamus monster, and the soul was condemned to oblivion. If it balanced with the feather, the soul was allowed to enter the eternal paradise of the field of reeds. In Egypt, justice was inseparable from spirituality. The courtroom was not just a venue for dispute. It was a sacred space where divine order was upheld. Unlike Babylon's rigid laws, Egyptian justice flowed with the moral tides of Ma'at, rewarding those who lived in harmony with truth and punishing those who disrupted the balance of the cosmos. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, which system you'd prefer to be judged under? Let me know your thoughts. All right. If you're finding this journey into ancient law as intriguing as I do, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover these historical perspectives. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, so you don't miss out on our next exploration. In ancient Greece, particularly in Athens during the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, justice took on a radically different form from the divine or king-centered systems of Babylon and Egypt. The Greeks began experimenting with something revolutionary, a justice system grounded in citizenship, debate, and public participation. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it laid the foundation for many modern legal concepts. Athenian democracy gave every male citizen the right to participate in the courts, both as a plaintiff or defendant, and as a juror. There were no professional judges or lawyers. Instead, massive juries, sometimes hundreds strong, were randomly selected from the population. These jurors were responsible not only for hearing cases, but for deciding verdicts and penalties, all without appeal. Trials were short, often completed in a single day, and each side was allowed a set amount of time to present their case, measured by a water clock called a clepsydra. The types of cases ranged widely: theft, slander, adultery, assault, property disputes, and even impiety disrespecting the gods could be brought to trial. While punishments for minor offenses were often fines or exile, more severe crimes could lead to death, particularly in cases involving treason or religious sacrilege. Socrates, for example, was famously sentenced to death for allegedly corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. Importantly, Greek justice systems did not rely on a written legal code accessible to all. While some laws were inscribed publicly, much of the legal knowledge was held by a small, literate elite, meaning outcomes often depended more on rhetoric than on precedent. A clever speaker, or a rich citizen who could hire a skilled orator to speak for them, had a clear advantage. Justice was tied closely to persuasion and performance. Athenians also used a form of preemptive justice called ostracism, in which citizens could vote once a year to exile someone from the city for 10 years. No crime had to be proven, just a consensus that someone had become too dangerous or powerful for the health of the state. Though flawed, ancient Greece introduced the idea that justice could be a collective civic responsibility, not just the decree of a ruler or priest. It was an early and chaotic experiment in legal equality that still echoes in today's courtrooms. In ancient India, justice was rooted in a profound and layered concept called dharma, a term that defies easy translation but roughly means duty, righteousness, and cosmic law. Unlike the law codes of Babylon or the civic trials of Greece, Indian justice was not just about right and wrong. It was about maintaining harmony in the universe, society, and the self. Dharma varied depending on one's age, caste, gender, and stage of life, making justice a deeply contextual and moral affair. The legal framework in ancient India was first formalized in texts known as the Dharma Shastras, with the most well-known being the Manusmriti, or Laws of Manu, compiled around the 2nd century BCE to the 3rd century CE. These texts weren't laws in the modern sense, but spiritual and social guidelines that shaped legal thinking for centuries. They defined everything from property rights and inheritance to marriage, contracts, and punishments. The caste system was central to this legal vision. Brahmins priests, Kshatriyas warriors, Vaishyas merchants, and Shudras laborers were each subject to different rules and penalties. For instance, a Brahmin committing a certain offense might face a fine or temporary exclusion from rituals, while a Shudra committing the same act could be sentenced to corporal punishment or worse. Justice in this system was not blind, it was hierarchical, deeply tied to one's birth. Despite this, Indian justice was not entirely unforgiving. The concept of intent mattered, as did repentance. A wrongdoer could lessen punishment through penance or charity, and judges were encouraged to consider the moral and spiritual state of the accused. Kings often served as the highest judicial authority, advised by Brahmin scholars and ministers, blending divine law with royal decree. Trials could involve ordeals, especially when evidence was inconclusive. These included holding red-hot iron, walking through fire, or retrieving objects from boiling oil, believed to reveal guilt or innocence based on divine will. Such methods were seen as a last resort, not standard practice. Above all, justice in ancient India aimed to restore cosmic balance. It wasn't just about punishing crime. It was about righting spiritual wrongs, correcting social disorder, and guiding souls back toward Dharma. It was a justice system where morality, religion, and law were inseparable. Across the ancient world, when legal systems hit a wall, when evidence was lacking, witnesses unreliable, or accusations unprovable, societies often turned to the gods to decide. One of the most dramatic and terrifying ways this happened was through trial by ordeal, a practice used in multiple cultures, including Babylon, India, and later medieval Europe. The idea was simple but brutal. If human justice couldn't determine guilt, divine justice would intervene through pain. In Babylon, one common ordeal involved throwing the accused into a river. If they floated or survived, the gods had spared them, and they were declared innocent. If they drowned, guilt was confirmed, though inconveniently the dead could no longer be punished. This method reflected a deep belief in divine oversight, as water was seen as a sacred and impartial force. In ancient India, as outlined in the Dharma Shastras, multiple forms of ordeal existed. These included walking across hot iron plowshares, retrieving coins from boiling oil, or surviving exposure to venom. The logic wasn't cruelty, it was divine arbitration. Surviving unharmed or with minimal injury was interpreted as proof of innocence. The gods, it was believed, would not allow the innocent to suffer without cause. Though horrific by modern standards, trial by ordeal wasn't always purely physical. In some cases, it involved oaths taken in sacred spaces. Swearing on a holy object or invoking a deity's wrath was thought to bind the speaker to truth. Lying under such conditions was believed to invite divine punishment, either immediately or in the afterlife. The psychological power of ordeal was immense. It could terrify the guilty into confession and bolster the faithful's belief in cosmic justice, but it also revealed how fragile human legal systems were, how deeply ancient peoples felt the need for something beyond human judgment. Ordeals were usually a last resort, a way to settle cases no one could otherwise resolve. Despite their reliance on supernatural outcomes, ordeals reflected a desire for fairness. They were brutal, yes, but they were also democratic in a strange way. Kings and peasants alike could be subjected to them. In the absence of forensics or due process, suffering became a courtroom, and the gods were expected to serve as judge, jury, and executioner. In ancient Egypt, justice was not administered by impartial courts or elected juries. It flowed directly from the divine authority of the pharaoh as both king and living god. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly embodiment of Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. This meant that maintaining justice wasn't just a political duty. It was a sacred obligation. The pharaoh had ultimate legal authority. His word could overrule any judgment, command the execution of criminals, pardon the guilty, or rewrite laws at will. This concentration of power was justified not through human logic, but through divine sanction. To disobey the pharaoh was to disrupt the harmony of the universe. But the pharaoh didn't govern alone. A vast bureaucratic system extended across Egypt. From royal officials in the capital to local magistrates in provincial towns, these officials acted as judges, scribes, and investigators. Their decisions were guided by royal edicts and the principles of Ma'at, rather than a formal legal code. Written laws were rare and largely case-based, passed down through precedent and scribal training. Courtrooms varied in size and importance. In local villages, disputes might be handled by a council of elders or temple priests. In major cities, formal judgment halls heard complex cases involving property, theft, assault, and inheritance. Proceedings were recorded in meticulous detail on papyrus scrolls, many of which survive today, giving us a rare window into how ancient Egyptians argued and judged. Trials included elements of both testimony and written evidence. Plaintiffs and defendants gave their accounts, often under oath. Witnesses were called and physical evidence, when available, was considered. False accusations were taken seriously and, if proven, could result in the accuser receiving the punishment intended for the defendant. Punishments varied widely, from restitution and fines to flogging, forced labor, or execution. Crimes against temples, tombs, or royal property were treated with special severity. Yet, the system also emphasized rehabilitation and compensation. In many cases, wrongdoers were given opportunities to make amends, particularly if they confessed voluntarily. What made Egyptian justice unique was its fusion of absolute monarchy and moral expectation. The pharaoh may have ruled with unchecked power, but he was expected to wield it with fairness. In the eyes of his people and his gods, a just ruler wasn't merely feared. He was revered as the guardian of cosmic balance. While divine kings and priestly classes dominated justice in many ancient civilizations, ancient Greece, particularly democratic Athens, took a dramatically different approach. Justice was no longer the exclusive domain of gods and monarchs. It became a public duty, shared and enacted by citizens through councils and popular assemblies. In Athens, the administration of justice rested primarily with two major institutions: the ecclesia, the citizen assembly, and the heliaia, a massive popular court composed of citizen jurors. Rather than being handed down from rulers, law and justice were shaped by everyday male citizens who took turns participating in governance. Laws were proposed and voted on by the assembly, while trials were conducted by large juries, sometimes numbering 500 or more. To prevent bribery or manipulation, there were no judges in the modern sense. Instead, magistrates, selected by lottery or popular vote, organized trials and ensured procedures were followed. However, it was the jurors, drawn randomly from citizens over the age of 30, who decided the verdict. With no appeal process and no deliberation room, verdicts were final and penalties were voted on directly after guilt was determined. This system favored persuasive speech over evidence. Defendants and plaintiffs had to represent themselves or hire skilled orators to write speeches on their behalf. Rhetoric was everything, and clever manipulation of public emotions could sway the outcome. While this system promoted civic participation, it also meant that justice could be uneven, less about law and more about persuasion. For certain political matters or threats to the state, special assemblies or councils were convened. One famous mechanism was ostracism, where citizens voted once a year to exile anyone deemed dangerous to democracy. No crime had to be committed, just a public consensus that someone's influence was unhealthy. 10 years in exile. No trial, no defense. Despite its imperfections, the Greek council-based system introduced powerful new ideas. The importance of peer judgment, open debate, and the notion that law belongs to the people. It was messy, emotional, and sometimes unjust, but it was also revolutionary. In Greek justice, the courtroom was a stage, the citizen was the judge, and justice was a public performance, one in which every man had a part to play, and where power was held briefly in the hands of the people themselves. In ancient India, justice extended far beyond courtrooms and punishments. It was interwoven with the concept of karma, the belief that every action carries moral weight and spiritual consequence, both in this life and in the next. Unlike the civic trials of Greece or the royal decrees of Egypt, Indian justice emphasized a cosmic ledger where no wrongdoing escaped ultimate accountability. Karma wasn't a legal mechanism. It was a moral law embedded in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions. Good actions led to positive outcomes, while bad actions brought suffering. Even if not immediately, a thief might evade human justice, but the universe itself would balance the scales. This belief reinforced ethical behavior, even in the absence of enforcement. Still, ancient India did have structured legal systems. The Manusmriti and other Dharmashastras offered guidance not just for courts, but for individual conduct. They outlined specific duties for each caste and role in society, reinforcing that justice was not a one-size-fits-all model. Kings were expected to rule according to Dharma, and failing to do so could bring spiritual as well as political consequences. Buddhism, which emerged in the 5th century BCE, further deepened the karmic view of justice. It rejected caste-based legal inequality and promoted universal moral principles, non-violence, truthfulness, and compassion. While not a legal code, Buddhist ethics influenced rulers like Emperor Ashoka, who in the 3rd century BCE renounced conquest and reformed his empire around Buddhist values. His famous rock edicts speak of mercy, tolerance, and the moral responsibility of governance. Justice then was about much more than trial and punishment. It was about inner purity, intention, and spiritual accountability. A person might escape a king's penalty, but not the consequences of their own deeds. Likewise, a king who ruled unjustly was believed to be storing up suffering for himself in future lives. This karmic understanding of justice created a powerful internalized system of order. It was deeply personal and for many far more intimidating than any earthly authority, whether enforced by law or left to the cosmos. Indian civilization viewed justice not merely as retribution, but as a force for restoring harmony between self, society, and the universe itself. Though thousands of years have passed since the rise of Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and India, their justice systems continue to shape how we think about crime, punishment, and fairness today. These ancient civilizations laid the intellectual, moral, and procedural foundations of legal systems that still guide societies across the globe. Babylon gave us the earliest known codified law, the idea that justice should be publicly visible, consistent, and enforced by the state. The principle of an eye for an eye still appears in legal and ethical debates, symbolizing both the call for proportionate punishment and the dangers of retributive excess. Egypt introduced the concept of divine kingship and moral law, where justice was not just social but cosmic. The emphasis on balance, truth, and harmony echoes in modern ideas of restorative justice, where the goal isn't just to punish but to restore community equilibrium. Greece revolutionized justice by tying it to citizenship and participation. Trial by jury, Public debate and the notion of peer judgment began in Athens and remain central to many legal systems today. Though imperfect and exclusionary, Greek democracy planted the seeds for legal systems that value public involvement and accountability. India contributed deeply spiritual and ethical dimensions to justice. The concepts of dharma and karma added a moral backbone to legal systems, encouraging personal responsibility and self-regulation even today. Indian law reflects a hybrid system where British legal structures coexist with religious and customary laws, demonstrating the enduring power of ancient traditions. These systems weren't flawless. They were often unjust, classist, patriarchal, and brutal. They privileged the elite, punished the vulnerable, and enforced hierarchies. But they also posed essential questions still relevant today. Who gets to define justice? Is it grounded in divine authority, civic consensus, or moral truth? Should law be equal for all or adjusted for social role? How do we balance punishment with mercy? Modern law may be more humane and structured, but it carries the DNA of these early systems. We still carve laws into stone, figuratively, expecting them to uphold order. We still debate justice in courts, assemblies, and temples of thought. And we still wrestle with the same eternal tension between power and fairness, law and morality, crime and consequence. In many ways, our pursuit of justice is ancient and ongoing. It's quite a journey to see how far our concepts of law and justice have come, and yet, how much they're still rooted in these ancient ideas. Which of these ancient systems do you find the most surprisingly modern, or perhaps the most disturbingly different from our own? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of ancient justice. If you found this dive into history's legal past enlightening, please give this video a like. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the fascinating complexities of the ancient world. Until then, stay thoughtful and stay curious.